There is a specific kind of arrogance that only money can produce. Not the loud kind, not the kind that shouts, but the quiet kind, the kind that lives in a half-second glance, the kind that has already decided what you are before you have said a single word. And on a cold grey Tuesday morning outside Cleveland, that arrogance made the worst mistake of its life. Because Scarlett Whitmore was 28 years old, CEO of a precision manufacturing company her father had built over 4 decades, with a $40 million contract meeting waiting across town and a logistics partner whose patience had been thinning for months, her mind already in the boardroom. And then the dashboard chimed twice, and white letters appeared across the driver's display reading, "Drive Unit Thermal Shutdown." And the SUV slowed and stopped right there on the shoulder of the road, and the dispatcher said, 2 hours before help could arrive, 2 hours when the meeting was 50 minutes away, and the driver spotted a garage ahead with hand-painted letters on a wooden sign reading, "Mercer Auto and Electric Repair." 1 bay, 1 lift, toolboxes stacked against the wall, and Scarlett looked at it once and smiled, not a warm smile, and said loudly, so her driver and assistant could both hear, that a place like this could probably handle a riding mower, but that a Whitmore drivetrain was something else entirely. And what she did not know was that a 6-year-old girl named Grace was standing in the back doorway, holding a stuffed rabbit and hearing every single word. And what she did not know was that the man stepping out of the bay wiping his hands on a clean shop rag would own her factory in 90 days. And that man was Caleb Mercer, tall and calm, his eyes carrying the kind of patience that is earned, not chosen. And he looked at the SUV and then at Scarlett, and then at the warning on the dashboard, and said he would find the problem in 30 minutes, and if he didn't, she owed him nothing. And Scarlett waved her permission with 2 fingers, the way you wave away someone you have already decided does not matter. And Caleb opened the hood and did not reach for his diagnostic tool, because he listened first, placing his palm above the drive unit and feeling for heat that should have been even and was not, catching the faint sweet chemical smell of a polymer running hotter than any dashboard had ever bothered to record. And then he plugged in his reader and scrolled through fault histories the vehicle had never surfaced. And the motor was fine, and the battery was healthy, and the software was untouched. And the problem was a single small valve inside the thermal regulation chain that was opening correctly but slowly. Just a few seconds of delay. And under normal driving those seconds would never matter, but commercial fleet vehicles stop and start all day and carry heavy loads and shift between idle and full power dozens of times an hour, and in those conditions those few seconds let heat collect against the main sensor and spike past its safety ceiling and trigger a full shutdown, meaning the vehicle was not broken at all, it was being suffocated by its own cooling system and then punished for the symptoms. And Caleb explained this to the driver in plain words with no performance, and nearby Scarlett stopped pretending to look at her phone because she recognized it. Those words matched, almost line for line, the customer complaints arriving at Whitmore Precision for months. Complaints she had been told were driver error and isolated cases and nothing systemic. And she said nothing, and Caleb cleaned a corroded contact and recalibrated the sensor response and reseated the lower harness and asked the driver to power up, and the dashboard swept and paused and cleared, and the SUV rolled forward smooth and quiet with the hum the marketing materials had always promised. And in the doorway Grace appeared, and the pride on her face was so fast and so unguarded it was almost painful to look at, and Scarlett looked away, and she paid. And as she handed over the bills, she said that fixing one car did not mean he understood a factory, and he should not confuse this small garage with the real world. And Caleb said nothing and set the money on the workbench and watched the SUV disappear. And then Grace's small voice came from behind him, asking why the woman was still angry when her car was working, and he had no answer. But he had a question he could not stop turning over. How many other vehicles were out there running with the same valve? And that night, after Grace fell asleep with her rabbit curled in her arm, Caleb sat at the workbench under the lamp and opened a folder he had been quietly building for nearly a year. Fault logs from 5 fleet vehicles across 7 months, different operators and different cities, but the same fault codes and the same issue and the same source, which was Whitmore Precision. And every operator had been told by authorized dealers to wait weeks or replace the entire assembly at enormous expense. And this was not coincidence. This was a design weakness wearing a sticker that read, "Driver Error." and he could have called a journalist or filed a complaint or posted everything publicly, but he sat with those options for a long time and then closed them, because a loud accusation from a garage with one lift would not weigh much against a company with lawyers, and more importantly, it would be a fight Grace would watch him have. And so he opened his notebook to a clean page and wrote 2 words at the top, which were 90 days, and below that a list, days 1 through 30 to find the root cause and build a prototype, days 31 through 45 to install it on real vehicles and document everything, days 46 through 60 to run it like a real business, days 61 through 75 to sign real contracts with real fleets, days 76 through 90 to find capital and be ready for whatever came next. And he did not know that night that what came next was a factory. And the first 30 days were not heroic. They were tired. He kept taking ordinary jobs during the day, because Grace needed groceries and bills do not pause for ambition. And at night he came back to the workbench and worked until his eyes refused him, selling a truck he had been holding onto to buy thermal imaging equipment and pressure sensors and salvage drivetrain assemblies. And Grace labeled boxes with colored markers, and one box carried her careful handwriting reading Dad's Big Fix, and by the 24th night he had a device the size of a man's palm, a secondary thermal regulator that sat quietly in line with the original system, not a replacement, but a translator, absorbing heat before it could spike against the main sensor, and touching nothing essential, and replacing nothing, and simply filling the gap between 2 parts that had stopped listening to each other. And by day 30 he could install it in under 1 hour, and the assemblies that had failed every test before finally held. And on day 45 a man named Brandon Hale pulled into the lot, 42 years old with a tired face and a worn cap, running a fleet delivering medical supplies for a regional hospital with a contract requiring 3 vehicles on the road at all hours, 2 vans dead for 3 weeks, and the service center 3 more weeks out. And Brandon was going to lose everything. And he walked into the bay and asked with the bluntness of a man with nothing left to lose whether Caleb could keep his vehicles running, and Caleb handed him a single page in plain language, saying the work was experimental, and data would be collected, and if it failed, it would be removed at no charge. And Brandon signed it and handed over the keys, and Caleb installed the device and ran a 30-mile test, and printed the log, and said, "Use it the way you always use it, and bring it back in 7 days." And the next morning the van rolled out before sunrise and ran every route, and held every temperature, and sat through every long idle at every hospital dock, and did not stop. Brandon came back on day 7. He brought the 2nd van, and then the 3rd, and he asked quietly if he could tell other fleet owners, and Caleb said yes, because a working answer to a real problem travels through an industry faster than any complaint ever could. And within 2 weeks, 5 more fleet operators were at the garage door, and by day 60 Caleb filed for a business named Mercer Thermal Systems and reorganized the garage with clear zones and serialized every device and tested 2 units for every one shipped and wrote a plain language warranty signed by himself. And he hired Dale Whitfield, who was 61 and a machinist laid off from Whitmore Precision despite a perfect record, and Renee Patterson, who was 44 and a quality inspector, cut in the same wave and told her experience could be replaced by software. And Caleb told them both in the first conversation that he had hired them for what they knew, and that he intended to listen. And Grace still labeled boxes and still left small drawings on the workbench and did not understand thermal valves, but understood that the place someone had called ugly was now full of people who treated it like it mattered. And inside Whitmore Precision the name Mercer Thermal Systems kept appearing in internal reports, and when Scarlett saw it, her mouth tightened, and she went back, and the lot looked different, with 3 fleet vans queued outside, and 2 technicians moving with quiet certain rhythm and serial charts on every wall, and a production board listing weekly targets. And Grace's cardboard sign still hung where it always had, but now it had company, and Scarlett made her offer of $500,000 for the design and a consulting salary and a non-disclosure agreement so Whitmore could absorb the technology quietly while he closed the garage with dignity. And Caleb listened without interrupting, and then asked one question, whether Whitmore would openly tell fleet customers that the original assemblies had a documented design flaw. And Scarlett spoke about phased communication and shareholder optics and avoiding unnecessary alarm, and Caleb said quietly that she did not want to buy a solution. She wanted to buy a silence, and he said no, and she called it grandstanding, and said a small garage could not replace a factory, and he did not raise his voice, and only said that the market does not need the largest factory, it needs the most trustworthy one, and she left without saying goodbye, and the weeks that followed broke Whitmore Precision. The internal patch bought weeks, not months, and 17 vehicles from one regional fleet came off the road in 10 days.